You see, something is going to happen. Something wonderful.
My God, it's full of stars.
Hey there, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in to the NY Patriot Show. If this is your first time coming across this channel or this podcast, thank you very much for hitting that play button. I also highly suggest to check out the rest of my stuff. I really do think that you will enjoy the other topics that I have covered and the amazing guests that I have had on. So while you're at it now, just in case you forget, hit that sub button because you're going to want to anyway after this episode. For the returning listeners, that's what's up. Thank you very much. You know the deal already. If you want to show your love, if you enjoyed the episode, hit that like and share it. Pass it on. And in case you are listening, just an FYI, I do have, as of right now, I do have a BitChute and I do have Rumble for the audios. For the audio and video. I do highly suggest for some of the shows, it would be a totally different experience if you were to look at the screen and have the visuals, but if not, if you don't mind just listening and not seeing it, that's quite all right. And for the people that are watching right now, I do have podcasts, and depending on what platform you're listening to, if you're watching this on YouTube, I can guarantee that my BitChute and my podcasts will have more stuff due to censorship issues, obviously. So check the show notes in the bottom. All the links for all my stuff is there. And this week we will be getting into a United States Air Force, retired at a United States Air Force officer. He was a Major General, Edwards Lansdale. I'm not sure if too many people really know who he is. I find him to be an interesting character. He kind of almost reminds me of like a Michael Aquino light, in a sense. I couldn't tell you if this guy was into, the Temple of Set in the Church of Satan, like Aquino was. I didn't come across any of that. But he was somebody who was, as far as I know, prior to Michael Aquino, that was into some psychological warfare, especially in the Vietnam, the Philippines, Cuba. For the most part, we'll just be basically going over Vietnam and the Philippines. But, you do hear, we all know, or not, maybe you don't know who Michael Aquino is. If you don't, I highly suggest to go through some of my older shows. I have had people on covering him before. I have a couple of episodes, and I just highly suggest checking him out, Googling him if you don't know who he is. He is a very interesting character. He goes anywhere from psychological warfare to possibly the Franklin scandal. Guy is all over the place if any of those stories are true. So definitely an interesting person to check out if you have not heard of him before. But yes, back to Edward Lansdale. Like I said before, he was, as far as I know, prior to Michael Aquino. And he was into psychological warfare. As you will see at the beginning, I'll probably just lightly go over, the operations name and kind of like what their outcome was, hoped to be. And then closer to the end, you'll actually hear like some of the stuff that this guy actually pulled off. When you see some of these things, you have to wonder, like, did the psychological warfare work in the way that he thought it did, to where like these people might have believed what he was trying to make them believe, or were they just creeped out in general by what they were experiencing, even if they were thinking it was the government doing it? It's obviously weird and creepy, and it would probably still work regardless. But I'll get into Edward Gary Lansdale. He was born in 1908 in Detroit, Michigan. His parents moved several times during his childhood, and he spent several years in New York before graduating from high school in California. He attended UCLA, where he earned money writing for newspapers and magazines, as well as becoming a lieutenant in the U.S. Reserves. After he graduated in 1931, he got a job in advertising, a profession at which he excelled. In 1941, when the USA entered World War II, he applied for active service under his lieutenant's commission. Due to his advertising experience, he was pushed into the propaganda wing of the Army, which was, it's kind of interesting, I guess, in itself. I guess depending on what kind of advertising he's doing. I mean, I guess most advertising is all trying to get somebody to buy something. So, I guess propaganda, trying to get people to buy his bullshit. Due to his advertising experience, he was pushed into the propaganda wing of the Army, which was folded into the O.S.S. later in the war. Once the war ended, the O.S.S. was broken up, and Lansdale, like many others, was sent to a remote posting, in his case in the Philippines. And this is when all the interesting stuff, I think, happens, once he gets to the Philippines. Some stuff I'll go over also with him. Edward Gary Lansdale, February 6, 1908 to February 23rd, 1987, was a United States Air Force officer until retiring in 1963 as a major general before continuing his work with the Central Intelligence Agency. So, yes, this guy was in the O.S.S. and up until it turned into the C.I.A. And there has been things that I have heard. I didn't come up with enough stuff that made me comfortable showing it. They say that he may have been instrumental in even starting the CIA. I don't know how true that is, how much weight to that there is. There is even, and I'll throw this in real quick, because I did want to add it, don't want to forget it. In a whole other rabbit hole, the JFK assassination. You type that in this guy's name. I'm sure you already know what I'm getting at. So, yeah, there's even a whole rabbit hole with this guy, supposedly, maybe involved with that. So, who knows? But, he was from the O.S.S. into the CIA. Lansdale was a pioneer in clandestine operations and psychological warfare. In the early 1950s, Lansdale played a significant role in suppressing the Huck insurgency in the Philippines. In 1954, he moved to Saigon and started the Saigon Military Mission, a covert intelligence operation which was created to sow dissension in North Vietnam. Lansdale believed the United States could win guerrilla wars by studying the enemy's psychology, an approach that won the approval of the presidential administrations of both Kennedy and Johnson. In his early life, Lansdale was born in Detroit, Michigan, like I mentioned before, on February 6, 1908, and later raised in Los Angeles. He was second of four sons of Sarah Frances Phillip and Henry Lansdale. Lansdale attended school in Michigan, New York, and California before attending UCLA, where he earned his way largely by writing for newspapers and magazines, just like I mentioned before. Career. Lansdale extended his tour to remain in the Philippines until 1948, helping the Philippine Army rebuild its intelligence services and resolve the cases of large numbers of prisoners of war. With most of Lansdale prior Army intelligence officer experience being with the U.S. Army Air Force units, he transferred to the U.S. Air Force and was commissioned as a captain when it was established as an independent service in 1947. After leaving the Philippines in 1948, he served as an instructor at the Strategic Intelligence School at Lowry Air Force Base, Colorado, where he received a temporary promotion to lieutenant colonel in 1949. Then it says here, Lansdale was an early practitioner of psychological warfare. adopting a tactic previously used in the Philippines by the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Lansdale spread rumors that Aswangs, blood-sucking demons in the Philippine folklore, were loose in the jungle. His men then captured an enemy soldier and drained the blood from his body, leaving the corpse where it could be seen and making the other people that they were trying to get rid of flee the region. Lansdale became friends with Ramon Magsaysay, the Secretary of National Defense, and with the help of Magsaysay, eventually became president of the Philippines on December 30th, 1953. Lansdale is said to have had run Magsaysay's campaign for the CIA in the 1953 Philippines general election. Lansdale helped the Philippine Armed Forces develop psychological operations, civic actions, and the rehabilitation of the Huck prisoners. Just call them the Hucks. But, at this time, they were saying that, the Hucks were like this communist rebellion. I don't know if that's really the truth. For the most part, things that I've seen and heard and looked into, even on other shows and just looked into on this, they were more or less like just kind of like farmers and people who just like didn't want to deal with having their stuff taken. And what was going on over there, they're just like, can I live? So they kind of took on like their own forces just to protect their own area, their own property, their own farmland. But they're trying to get rid of them. They're considering them a problem, I guess. So now in Vietnam, after successfully ending the left-wing Huck insurgency in the Philippines and building support for Magsaysay's presidency, CIA Director Alan Dulles instructed Lansdale to do what you did in the Philippines in Vietnam. Lansdale had previously been a member of General John W. O. Daniels' mission to Indochina in 1953, acting as an advisor to the French forces on special counter-guerrilla operations against the Viet Minh, or however you say that. Operation Passage to Freedom changed the religious balance in Vietnam. Before the war, the majority of Vietnamese Catholics lived in North Vietnam, but after the operation, the South held the majority, 55% of which were refugees from the North. Lansdale accomplished that by dropping leaflets in the northern hamlets stating that Christ has gone to the South. Wow. And other leaflets showing maps with concentric circles emanating from Hanoi, suggesting an imminent nuclear bomb strike on the northern capital. Then his anti-Castro campaign from 1957 to 1963, Lansdale worked for the Department of Defense in Washington, serving as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Special Operations, staff member of the President's Committee on Military Assistance, and Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations. During the early 1960s, he was chiefly involved in clandestine efforts to topple the government of Cuba, including proposals to assassinate Fidel Castro. Much of his work was under the aegis of Operation Mongoose, which was the operational name for the CIA plan to topple Castro's government. According to Daniel Ellsberg, who was at one time a subordinate to Lansdale, Lansdale claimed that he was fired by President Kennedy's defense secretary, Robert McNamara, after he declined Kennedy's offer to play a role in the overthrow of the Diem regime. So that's a little bit about some of the things that he has done there. Real quick, just to cover the Office of Strategic Services. The Office of Strategic Services, O.S.S., was the intelligence agency of the United States during World War II. The O.S.S. was formed as an agency of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs to coordinate espionage activities behind enemy lines for all branches of the United States Armed Forces. Other functions included the use of propaganda, subversion, and post-war planning. The O.S.S. was dissolved a month after the end of the war. Intelligence tasks were shortly later resumed and carried over by its successors, the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, and the Independent Central Intelligence Agency, C.I.A. Real quick, I just wanted to cover a little bit more about the personnel at the O.S.S. The names of all 13,000 O.S.S. personnel and documents of their O.S.S. service, previously a closely guarded secret, were released by the U.S. National Archives on August 4th, 2008. Among the 24,000 names were those of Sterling Hayden. Sterling Hayden was an American actor, author, sailor, and decorated Marine Corps officer and an Office of Strategic Services agent during World War II. So, I find that something worth mentioning. And then you also have, this one was very, very interesting to me. We have Julia Caroline Child. Yes, Julia Child. The lady on TV cooking. Was an American cooking teacher, author, and television personality. She is recognized for bringing French cuisine to the American public with her debut cookbook, Mastering the Art of French Cooking, and her subsequent television programs. Blah, blah, blah. But Julia Child, wow. And then another one on here that I just wanted to mention, John Martin Feeney, known professionally as John Ford, was an American film director and naval officer. So we had a film director as well. And if I even, and I think it even said Julia Child, who later authored cookbooks, worked directly under Donovan. So I wonder what's up with her and the CIA. Or the O.S.S. Sorry. Very weird. Oh, before I forget, here is a little clip from the O.S.S. It was kind of, I guess, their video of showing you what's going on there and what they're training for and the type of people there. I figured I'd play that for you real quick just so you get an idea what the O.S.S. was.
O.S.S. officers came from all walks of life and brought interesting life experiences and unusual skills to their work. It was in many ways a dream team that would never be seen again. A few used their status to their advantage, like Hollywood director John Ford, who used his easy access to cameras to gather information for the Allied forces. Moe Berg, a professional baseball player who played for a number of teams including the Red Sox, helped the O.S.S. with his fluency in many European languages. And movie star Sterling Hayden took his acting to the next level to go behind enemy lines in Yugoslavia. Other O.S.S. operatives had backgrounds ranging from academics to entertainers, to circus performers and even swimmers and safecrackers. Men and women were recruited from all over the country. O.S.S. is remembered for having a good record for recruiting and employing women.
So now, getting to his Operation Passage to Freedom. Operation Passage to Freedom was a term used by the United States Navy to describe the propaganda effort and the assistance in transporting in 310,000 Vietnamese civilians, soldiers, and non-Vietnamese members of the French army from communist North Vietnam to non-communist South Vietnam between the years of 1954 and 1955. The French and other countries may have transported a further 500,000. In the wake of the French defeat in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. And yeah, this was his religious, I guess, propaganda psyop where he was trying to move people from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. The U.S. ran a propaganda campaign through the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, to enhance the size of the southward exodus. The program was directed by Colonel Edward Lansdale, who masqueraded as the assistant U.S. air attaché in Saigon, while leading a covert group that specialized in psychological warfare. Yeah. Lansdale had advised Diem that it was imperative to maximize the population in the South in preparation for the national reunification elections. When Diem noted the limited ability of the South to absorb refugees, Lansdale assured him that the U.S. would bear the burden. Diem thus authorized Lansdale to launch the propaganda campaign. Lansdale employed a variety of stunts to encourage more Northerners to move south. South Vietnamese soldiers in civilian clothing infiltrated the North, spreading rumors of impending doom. One story was that the communists had to deal with the Vietnam's traditional enemy, China, allowing 2 communist Chinese divisions to invade the North. The story reported that the Chinese were raping and pillaging with the approval of the communists. Lansdale hired counterfeits to produce bogus leaflets on how to behave under communist rule, advising them to create a list of their material possessions so that the communists would be able to confiscate them more easily, thereby fomenting peasant discontent. I mean, I find that amazing would people actually fall for writing down what you own so people will come and take your stuff? What the Lansdale men forged documents that promised to seize all property, and he claimed that the day following distribution of these leaflets, refugee registration tripled. Impressive. Lansdale campaign focused on Northern Catholics who were known for their strongly anti-communist communist tendencies. His staff printed tens of thousands of pamphlets with slogans such as "Christ has gone south" and "The Virgin Mary has departed from the north." And here we are with Operation Mongoose. The Cuban project, also known as Operation Mongoose, was an extensive campaign of terrorist attacks against civilians and covert operations carried out by the United States Central Intelligence Agency in Cuba. It was officially authorized on November 30th, 1961 by U.S. President John F. Kennedy. Operation Mongoose was a secret program against Cuba aimed at removing the communists from power, which is a prime focus of Kennedy's administration. A document from the United States Department of State confirms that the project aimed to help Cuba overthrow the communist regime, including its leader Fidel Castro, and it aimed for a revolt which can take place in Cuba by October 1962. And this I just wanted to add real quick, too, before I move on. The formal authorization for action. The government formally authorized the operation on when? March 17th, 1960, when President Eisenhower signed off on a CIA paper titled A Program of Covert Action Against the Castro Regime. The propaganda offensive employed the use of radio broadcasts and leaflets to be passed around. The measure was solely aimed at propagating support for the provisional government. Also want to mention the CIA's budget estimation for this covert operation was approximately $4.4 million. I just wanted to add this stuff in because 17, I have a series with that. Dates on the 17th. My opinion, we've seen some 17 stuff going on for a bit now. I've been seeing a lot of 44s, crazy 8s. Just figured I'd toss this in there. Related Operation Mongoose proposals. In addition to Operation Northwoods, under the Operation Mongoose program, the U.S. Department of Defense had a number of similar proposals for actions to be taken against the Cuban regime of Fidel Castro. 12 of these proposals came from a February 2nd, 1962 memorandum entitled Possible Actions to Provoke, Harass, or Disrupt Cuba, written by General W. H. Craig and submitted to General Edwards Lansdale, the commander of the Operation Mongoose project. The memorandum outlines Operation Bingo, a false flag to create an incident which has the appearance of an attack on U.S. facilities in Cuba, thus providing an excuse for the U.S. military might to overthrow the current government of Cuba. And it also included Operation Dirty Trick. Now, some of these didn't actually get used, but I find it interesting that these things even make it this far up and are considered for proposal. Interesting. Operation Northwoods was a proposed false flag operation against American citizens that originated within the U.S. Department of Defense of the United States government in 1962. The proposals called for the CIA operatives to both stage and actually commit acts of violent terrorism against American military and civilian targets, blaming them on the Cuban government and using it to justify a war against Cuba. The possibilities detailed in the document included the remote control of civilian aircraft, which would be secretly repainted as USA Air Force planes, the possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, sinking boats of Cuban refugees on high seas, blowing up a U.S. ship, and orchestrating terrorism in U.S. cities. Damn. Several other proposals were included within Operation Northwoods, including real or simulated actions against various U.S. military and civilian targets. The operation recommended developing a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, and other Florida cities, and even in Washington, which involved the bombing of civilian targets themselves, which was to be blamed on the irresponsible Cuban government to paint a false image of Fidel Castro and misinform the American public. I mean, it's amazing how, somebody actually comes up with this stuff and, yeah, okay, this is cool. Wow. Just because of, I guess, how I do some of my stuff with the Occult Rejects, sometimes I will start to look into these family members. Whether, the person that I'm covering, I'll look into their siblings, their parents, and to see if there is anything interesting about them, what they did. The father did own something to do with an automobile company or parts or something like that prior. So, his father already came, he already came from money. The mother I looked up didn't find much that was that interesting, but I did find here, which I think it's, I found her gravestone, and it says right there, family members, spouse, Edward Gary Lansdale, that is his wife. That's his wife. And, on these sites, you can, whatever, I guess, send or leave a flower on the, the site itself. And you have two of them here. And you see this one right here? What the I don't know. I thought that one was weird. And just tossing that one in there. Who knows? Yeah. So, real quick, to cover, to cover a little bit more of these operations that he was involved in, we had Operation Wandering Soul, Ghost Tape Number 10 in the Haunted Jungles of Vietnam. Vietnamese legends held that on the anniversary of a person's death, a spiritual channel between our world and the afterlife can open, making communication possible. It was just such a phenomenon. Just after dusk on the night of February 10th, 1970, the jungles near the U.S. Army's Fire Support Base Chamberlain in South Vietnam came to life with some spine-chilling sounds. Mournful wailing, sobbing, and baleful shrieks filled the air. Unearthly sounds that seemed to be coming from everywhere, but nowhere in particular. And amid the blood-curdling chorus was a clearly audible warning. "My friends," pleaded a disembodied voice from across the darkness, "I have come back to let you know that I am dead. I am dead. In hell. I'm in hell," it continued in Vietnamese. "Don't end up like me. Go home, friends, before it's too late." The eerie warning was followed by a chorus of other strange sounds, banging gongs, sobbing women, and a child's voice calling for her father. To the Viet Cong soldiers hiding in blackness beyond the American perimeter, these otherworldly noises sounded like the wandering souls of departed comrades. According to local folklore, the spirits of the dead that were not returned home for proper burial were cursed to walk the earth in torment until their remains were found and properly, taken care of. Vietnamese legends held that on the anniversary of the death of one of those lost souls, a spiritual channel between our world and the afterlife opens, making communication possible. They had basically planes flying over with speakers. They're playing that stuff through the air, trying to scare the crap out of them. If you want to hear it, this is a little bit of what they were playing as well. I thought that was interesting. The noises, and the noises were actually part of a taped broadcast that was being blasted across the countryside by American GIs armed with portable PA speakers. In fact, the entire program had been recorded weeks earlier in a Saigon sound studio. It was all part of a top-secret U.S. military psychological warfare campaign known as Wandering Soul. And the voices and noise played in the jingle that night came from the session unofficially known as Ghost Tape Number 10. Organized by the U.S. Army's 6th C.I.A. Battalion in cooperation with the U.S. Navy, the Wandering Soul campaign was intended to frighten and demoralize the enemy and hopefully compel many to desert their positions. In the shadowy war against communism led by the United States, the Philippines was subjected to a disturbing branch of psychological warfare by the C.I.A. What a surprise. Lieutenant Colonel Edward G. Lansdale was sent to end the guerrilla Huck insurgency against the government. The group remained from World War II in hopes of social and agricultural reform in the Philippines. During his time there, he used local mythology and folklore to strike fear and coercion into the Huck rebels and the surrounding population by using psychological warfare. At the conclusion of his psychological warfare campaign, Lansdale shifted to a political advisory role and implemented the process for the CIA to control the political landscape of the country. Simultaneously, using the Hucks to their advantage against the Japanese while dismantling their networks, the United States began their plan to reinstate their control over the Pacific Island. The war ended in 1945. The UF efforts did not. There were U.S. troops kept active in the Philippines, and the U.S.-sponsored government was preparing an army to fight the Hucks. The shift from conventional operations to psychological and clandestine began mainly once Lieutenant Colonel Edward G. Lansdale arrived in 1950. Lansdale worked in the advertising field, then was an officer in the U.S. Air Force prior to joining the Central Intelligence Agency's covert operation in the Philippines. Through a mix of boots on the ground operations, propaganda, and political measures, Lansdale solidified the field we know as psychological warfare today as a standard tactic by military forces. Lansdale arrived in the middle of a civil war against the Huck Rebellion in the countryside of the Philippines. He organized a group called the Civil Affairs Office with his team from the CIA. This office was tasked with designing a strategy to bring down a popular guerrilla army when force was not enough. Lansdale organized his team to study the legends and folklore of the people on the surrounding countryside and tried to use their beliefs against them. His first move was a rather simple one. His team waited for a cloudy day, flew over local villages with a loudspeaker attached and project curses in the native Tagalog language to the unaware villagers. These curses particularly were focused on those who continued to aid the Huck fighters with shelters and supplies. Due to this, the Huck fighters in the targeted towns were starved out of their hiding places or revealed by superstitious locals. Another operation by the Lansdale team was a more mysterious one. The group worked to identify Huck sympathizers that were providing any amount of support to the fighters. Once identified, the group would work through the night to paint mysterious eyes on walls to the target home. These eyes of God were meant to let the sympathizers know that some group knows of their actions, and kept the rest of the population wary to help the Hucks. The mysterious presence of the malevolent eyes the next morning had a sharply sobering effect, said Lansdale. In studying the folklore of the region, Lansdale team made a discovery of a creature that locals believed to roam the hills known as the Aswang. The Aswang is comparable to the vampire-like creature that drinks its victim's blood. The Hucks would often operate out of the surrounding wooded area of a town and attack government forces. So Lansdale sent a team to where they were operating in an attempt to replicate the Aswang myth. Once they arrived, the team kidnapped a fighter, poked holes in their neck, drained their blood, and left their body where it would be found. Once dead, and no blood, it was all drained out, it was found by the Hucks. The remaining forces quickly left the area. Now, it's just one thing I would like to add. I mean, and I had even heard that some of them may have even been hung from trees and made it look like that they were bled out. I don't know if that's true or not. May not be, but if I was to see that, even if I didn't think it was a vampire, I would still probably think that's some pretty crazy stuff. And regardless if I thought it was a vampire or not, it may have made me think twice about staying around there. Just saying. And Lansdale collaborated with local forces and other advisors on other measures to take in the region, which included propaganda films, sowing dissident among Huck supporters, and even dressing Philippine government forces as Huck fighters and harassing civilians. Lansdale also manipulated the political structure of the Philippines to fit the CIA plans for the nations. By befriending the former Defense Secretary Ramon Magsaysay, he was able to convince him to run for president of the country with the CIA's backing. Magsaysay was essentially a puppet of Lansdale and the CIA, with reports of Lansdale even physically assaulting him if he did not want to comply with their plans. The CIA's candidate won in 1953, but not after meticulous meddling by the agency. They drugged his opponents, funneled in large sums of money to the campaign through the National Movement for Free Elections, and even snuck in weapons to the country in case Magsaysay lost. The Hux insurgency was quelled in 1954. Lansdale, having built the foundation that Magsaysay's government was built on, effectively facilitated the CIA's puppeteering of the Philippines for the later of the 20th century. The CIA wrote Magsaysay's speeches, his foreign and domestic policy, as well as fed him false reports on their policies' popularity with the Philippine people. The CIA even went as far as launching a smear campaign against a political rival of Magsaysay. First, they planted rumors that the individual was a Chinese spy, but also disseminated condoms with holes in them that were advertised as supplied by the individual as well. So I think after covering all that, they do kind of credit him with, starting psychological warfare. I'm sure that's debatable. I'm sure that may not even be correct. But he's definitely somebody that I have come across that is a little bit from back in the day than I expected. Basically the dude got rid of the person who was running the Philippines, put in the person he wanted to run the Philippines, wrote their stuff, got the guy elected. So, in my opinion, the CIA controlled the Philippines then, and for all I know, it still does now. And through all these tactics, fake vampire things, eyes on houses, helicopters cursing through the air, making you think there's ghosts, going in and finding out the folklore and using their beliefs against themselves. That I do have to say is actually kind of impressive. But that is it. That's really all I had for this topic. I thought it was just an interesting person that I had come across that I was like, I really never heard of this guy. He's before, like I said, Michael Aquino. I'm not saying that this guy, is as bad as Michael Aquino was, but he definitely was into studying, doing psychological warfare. Silly as this stuff sounds, some of it, and for the most part, most of it did work. Look what happened in the Philippines. This guy obviously knew what he was doing, and it worked. So, I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe other people didn't know about the guy, just like I did. Something interesting. Maybe there's other stuff in here that you can even look into yourself and find out even more interesting stuff that I just didn't come across. I wasn't about to drag this out, but I did cover some of the more really out there, entertaining, and almost shocking. That, for one, the things that were even proposed that never happened. These people had no problem proposing these things. And the things that were done that just seemed so silly actually worked. It's like, what? So it makes you wonder, how perfected is it now? And how, could the stuff be going on and we have the faintest idea? Think of how old these are and how much time they have perfected to do this stuff. Again, if this is your first time listening to the show and you're still listening, that's what's up. thank you. Hit that like and hit that sub button. For the returning followers, you already know what I'm going to say. Again, there's no price tag on these shows. It's not behind a paywall. And you don't got to hear stupid commercials either. So the best gift that you could give, pass it on. Hit that like button. Hit that share button. Pass it on to a friend, family, coworker, whoever. Get it out there. And thank you. That is the end of this one. Now, again, like I mentioned before, if you're listening, I do have video. Or if you're watching, I do have audio. All the links is in the bottom for all of that. And I do also want to stress, we do have the Element server. I highly suggest to check that out. There's other shows in there. There's tons of people. There is tons of channels. It is not me that makes that thing great. It is all the people that have put in the effort to make the Element server and all the people that are in there posting stuff and creating more topics and channels. I highly suggest to check it out. That is in the bottom as well. And that is the end of another NY Patriot. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.